was a boy who lived before the flood, before the waves erased the old world, before the symbols were lost, before the song of earth was silenced. His name is not remembered in books, but his memory lives in stone, etched into a chamber that no one has found yet. This is not a myth. This is a remembrance. From Elentra, the keeper of glyph lines. And from me, a soul who once wore his face. I am the boy before the flood. I was born in a quiet stone village far from the coast. The land was warm but dry. It curved like a bowl encircled by soft red cliffs. They called it the Basin, though that wasn't its true name. The true name was whispered only in the wind, a name carried through branches and roots and rock. He had no title, no claim, just a boy who watched everything. He watched how the light moved. He watched how the elders drew symbols in the sand before sunrise. And he watched the sky with knowing eyes, as if he remembered something no one had told him. They thought he was quiet, slow, even strange. But he was listening. He was listening for the world beneath the world. He could hear the humming in stone. He could feel the call of rivers long buried. He traced spirals in the dirt with his finger, not knowing why. And he spoke to the wind. He didn't know it then, but he was carrying a memory. Sometimes the birds would leave too early. The water would taste like metal, and the sky would pulse a strange color after nightfall. He noticed it all, but no one else would say it out loud. Something was coming. He didn't know what, but he knew he would have to remember. And then, one day, the messenger came. One morning, before the sun rose, the boy was already awake. The village was quiet, but not still. The wind had stopped. Even the insects held their breath. And that was the first sign. He stepped outside and saw the sky bleeding light, a color he'd never seen before. Then he saw her. She didn't walk, she hovered slightly. Not like a ghost, like something ancient. She wore a cloak the color of dust and rain. Her hair floated behind her like ink in water. And when she looked at him, he remembered her, but he didn't know why. She knelt before him, and from her satchel, she pulled a small object wrapped in linen. When she opened it, there was a glyph burned into a flat stone. It shimmered faintly with that same skylight color. "The glyph is yours," she said. "You must carry it when the waters rise." The boy asked her what waters she meant. She didn't answer. She only looked up toward the cliffs. He turned and saw the trees swaying with no wind, the earth humming with no sound. She said the memory would try to flee, that the ones who held the truth had already scattered. And if the glyph was not placed in time, what was sacred would dissolve into mist. She told him the others had failed, that the keepers were lost or broken or afraid, and that he, a child with no name, no training, was the last one who might still remember. Then she vanished, not into light, into dust. Anen descended the final steps into the chamber. It wasn't carved by human hands. The walls were smooth, humming, formed by memory itself. Here, sound made stone. Here, light carried thought. This was one of the last vaults. He paused at the threshold, scroll pressed to his chest. The glyph on the page pulsed faintly. Spiral, circle, line beneath. It was not ink, it was frequency shaped into form. He walked slowly into the center. 12 pillars circled the chamber, one for each keeper. But only his pillars still glowed, faint blue at its base, waiting. He knelt. The scroll unrolled on its own, as if lifted by breath. The glyph rose from the page. It hovered above his palms. Anen placed both hands flat on the floor, and then, with his voice, low and true, he hummed. Uean Kareth. It was not a chant, it was a return. The glyph hovered, then slid into the base of the pillar like a key into a lock. A deep tone rumbled through the chamber. The pillar lit up. Then another across the room sparked once. Then again. Something was waking. Not the full vault, no, the others had not come. But the system responded. A circular pattern of light emerged on the floor beneath Anen. The resonance scan began. It read his soul. It mapped his memory. And then it offered a choice. Anchor or scatter, the vault asked. Anen closed his eyes. He had hoped to return the glyph and step away. But now he saw he was the glyph. It had imprinted on him when he was a boy. He whispered, "Anchor." A small sphere of light emerged from the pillar's core. It hovered to his chest, entered his sternum, and sealed itself inside him. The scroll faded, the light dimmed, but he remained standing now alone in the quiet chamber. He was no longer a messenger. He was the archive. Anen stood in the center of the chamber. The vault quieted, but something pressed at the edge of his awareness, like water behind glass. Not literal water, but a wave of unbeing. He had heard the word flood whispered since childhood. No one knew what it meant. Now, with the glyph sealed within him, the truth unfolded. The flood was not rain, not an ocean rising, not punishment. It was the collapse of coherence, a flood of forgetting. Reality began to melt, not visibly at first, but in frequency. The threads that once held memory in place began to unravel. Time bent. Names slipped away. Places blurred. What had once been known became distant and then vanished. To the people of that era, it felt like madness. a quiet unraveling at first, then a wave of confusion. Some wept without knowing why. Others clung to half-remembered rituals and symbols, sensing something ancient was slipping away. They watched their world dissolve, but had no language for what was leaving. So they called it the flood. But it was not water. It was the collapse of memory. In ancient times, 12 anchors had held the spiral grid in place. 12 glyphs at sacred sites, each held by a living keeper. But over time, the keepers forgot. They were hunted, silenced. Some turned against each other. And without the resonance they held, the harmonic fields broke apart. The earth distorted, time fractured. False histories surged in like murky water. This was the flood. It did not wash away the land. It washed away the truth of the land. Whole lifetimes were lost. Soul memories scattered. The spiraled path turned to a maze. And yet Anen remembered. Not fully, but enough to return the glyph. And in doing so, he created a still point in the distortion, a seed of coherence. The vault did not reopen. The world above still pulsed with confusion. But in the chamber of his breath, he held a clear tone. The earth listened, and somewhere, far away, another glyph stirred. The chamber did not speak in words, but it hummed. A deep, resonant tone rose from the pillar. It was not a note, not quite. More like a memory sung before language. Anen felt it inside his ribs, like it had always been there, hiding in the hollows between his bones. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just listened. The sound was low at first, but it spiraled upward, like wind rising through a canyon, or flame whispering through wood. Each spiral carried a tone, and each tone contained a pattern. And though he did not understand the language, his body remembered it. The glyph on his palm began to glow faintly, not with light, but with remembrance. The tone vibrated the chamber walls. It touched the old stone. It moved through the dust. It awakened something sleeping beneath time. Anen realized this wasn't just a message for him. This sound was meant to last, to echo, to remain. A seed tone planted at the collapse point, so that one day, when someone returned with a matching glyph, they would hear it again, not from the chamber, but from within themselves. He was not the first. He was not the last. He was the middle note in a living chord, strung between timelines. And that tone, the one that hummed through his spine, would find another. It would keep singing even if the world forgot. And so he stayed, just a little longer, breathing with the sound, letting it rewrite the silence inside of him. Then the tone faded, not all at once, but like mist pulling slowly from the surface of a lake. Anen exhaled, though he hadn't realized he was holding his breath. He turned from the pillar, and for the first time in hours, stepped out of the circle of glyph light. His feet felt heavier now, but the weight wasn't sorrow, it was meaning. He walked to the edge of the chamber. The door, once sealed, had opened. The world beyond it was not the one he left. It was darker, quieter. The air held a silence shaped like aftermath. And yet, as he stepped into the dim corridor, he saw her, a girl about his age, wrapped in a worn blue shawl. She stood at the threshold waiting. She did not speak, but her eyes held a knowing, not of him, but of the sound, like she had heard it in her dreams. And Anen, still holding the scroll in one hand, felt the glyph on his palm stir again, not glowing, but responding. She was another, not a keeper, not yet, but a thread in the braid. She reached out her hand, not to take, but to walk beside. Together, they left the vault, the sound, the scroll, the glyph, all still living. Not preserved in stone, but carried in breath, in footstep, in memory. The flood had taken much, but not all. And as they disappeared into the long dusk, the earth turned beneath them, listening for the next awakening.